The desert had been quiet for so long that the wind forgot its own name. Beyond the basalt ridges and the dry riverbeds braided like old scars, night lifted out of the sand and draped itself across Arizona in a blue so deep it felt bottomless. That was when the first light rose. No sound, no flare, just a cool, deliberate bloom above the western mesas, the color of a welding torch peering through fog. It hovered, and then it wasn't a single light anymore. It was a pair, then five, sketching a shallow V that drifted with the unhurried grace of something that had rehearsed this for centuries. The coyotes went silent. An irrigation pump stuttered and died. A lone camera on a rusted tripod ticked its last frame and froze with its red recording lamp half blinking. The air acquired a taste, metallic, like licking a battery, like rain about to happen in a place that forgot what rain felt like. Somewhere between Phoenix's distant glow and the black teeth of the mountains, a human figure, small, stubborn, stung by awe, held her breath long enough to feel the earth breathe back. The lights tilted, aligned, and without so much as a goodbye, slipped into darkness that remembered them. If this opening hooked you, hit like, follow for the next chapter, and drop your theory in the comments. Drones, flares, or something that doesn't need our words at all. Marisol had trained herself to ignore late-night calls. Nothing good bloomed after midnight except rumors and regret. But the number that vibrated across her cracked screen kept coming back, blocked, insistent, as if the phone belonged more to the voice on the other end than to her. On the third ring of the third attempt, she answered, pen already in hand out of an old reporter's reflex. A man spoke without introducing himself, the vowels roughened by dust and distance. He named a place she knew only by map margins, a town too small to be a destination, too stubborn to be a ghost. They're back, he said, and the line hiccuped with a hiss like wind crossing a bottle. He didn't mean migratory birds or training sorties. He meant the geometry in the sky, the articulated hush that outlived headlights and chatter, the lights that some swore had paused over highways in '97 and stared down with the patience of a surveyor. He told her about a rancher's wife who had taken to sleeping with the curtains open just to catch their silent march, about dogs that wouldn't cross certain swathes of sand, about a boy whose drone went up chasing them and never came back down. Then he named a time and hung up. The dial tone felt like a reprimand. Marisol stood by her window, city glow on her knuckles, and understood that the desert had dialed her number on purpose. The question was whether she would answer it with her feet. By morning, the caller's words had nested in Marisol's head like static she couldn't tune out. She packed light, recorder, notebooks, 3 lenses, one old camera whose viewfinder had a crack through the center like a scar she refused to repair. The highway out of Phoenix stretched in merciless straight lines, cutting through scrub and memory. Every few miles, she passed the skeleton of a billboard advertising ghost motels that no longer existed, their paint peeled away by decades of sand-laden wind. She drove with the windows open to taste the heat. It was a kind of baptism, the smell of creosote, the hiss of distant cicadas, and the faint hum under the asphalt that travelers sometimes claim to hear, the desert's own frequency. By dusk, she reached a crossroads where the GPS blinked out and the horizon swallowed all direction. Ahead lay a stretch locals called the Nowhere Line, a county road that didn't appear on official maps. The few who ventured there said their compasses spun uselessly, that headlights dimmed for no reason, and that at night the sand seemed to shimmer with its own breath. Marisol parked by a rusted sign half buried in dune and waited. The sun bled out behind the mountains, and in the bleeding she thought she saw a glimmer that didn't belong to any star. The desert, she realized, was awake, and it had noticed her arrival. The town of La Purissima wasn't a town anymore, just 8 houses, 2 of them still alive, and a gas station that pretended to function for the sake of passing truckers. The first person to talk to her was an old man sitting under a tilted porch roof. his eyes milky, but his memory sharp as cactus spines. He remembered March 13th, 1997, the Phoenix Lights night. The sky was crowded, he rasped, fingers drumming on a rusted coffee can, but not with planes. Planes announced themselves. He pointed toward the mesa, where the air shimmered even under daylight, as if heat alone couldn't explain it. Sometimes they come back, no sound, just knowing. Marisol showed him a photo from her phone, a still of faint orbs over desert scrub. The old man squinted, then nodded once. "That's where the dogs stopped barking," he said. Behind him, a radio murmured static that occasionally broke into fragments of human speech, half a word, a syllable, then silence again. Marisol's recorder caught a low hum that wasn't wind or electricity. It was deeper, pulsing, the rhythm of something vast and unseen breathing through rock. She checked the battery, still full, but when she played it back, there was nothing. Only silence, clean and absolute. Night in La Purissima was an event. There were no streetlights, no neon signs, no human claim on darkness. When Marisol walked toward the edge of town, guided by the faint shimmer of her phone flashlight, she found the house the caller had mentioned, a small adobe dwelling where the sand had nearly swallowed the porch. A woman stood in the doorway, middle-aged, her expression carved out of fatigue and conviction. Her name was Inez Valera, and she had been the one watching the skies since the spring equinox. Inside, her living room was a museum of obsession. Polaroids pinned to walls, hand-drawn maps of constellations, newspaper clippings about the Phoenix Lights' return. Inez poured coffee so strong it trembled in the cup. "They move like thought," she said, tracing a V-shape on the table with her finger. "Slow, purposeful. Sometimes they hover right over that ridge." She pointed toward the dark outline of the mesa, now no more than a silhouette against a purple sky. "They don't blink. That's how you know they're not planes." Marisol listened as Inez described the low hum that preceded the lights, a sound that made her heart sink to its rhythm, as if her body were being tuned to an unseen frequency. She said the lights had been appearing every 13 nights, always at the same time. Tonight was the 13th. As the clock struck 11, they went outside. The desert breathed in anticipation, wind curling around the house like whispered warnings. For a long while, nothing happened. Then a pulse, soft, distant, deliberate, touched the horizon. A bead of light ascended from behind the ridge, then another and another, until 5 orbs hung in perfect formation, silent and steady as eyes that did not blink. The air vibrated with invisible weight. The sand began to quiver underfoot. Marisol lifted her camera, but the lens fogged instantly, like exhaling against glass. Inez whispered, "They're closer tonight." And for the first time, Marisol felt a chill that didn't belong to temperature, a cold that seemed to come from the stars themselves. The lights tilted, realigned, and in a slow, synchronized motion began to descend toward them. When the lights descended, they did not fall as objects fall. They glided, deliberate and slow, until the air itself seemed to ripple around them like heat seen through water. Every shadow in the yard bent toward the glow, stretching long and trembling as if the earth were bowing. Marisol's heartbeat synced with the low hum that filled the silence, a resonance she could feel behind her ribs, inside her teeth. Her camera refused to focus. Every time she tried, the aperture locked and the screen flashed Error 404. She turned it off, relying instead on her eyes, which were beginning to tear from the brightness. The lights hovered no more than 100 meters above the ground now, forming a geometric arc that looked both deliberate and ancient. One shifted slightly out of formation, pulsing in a rhythm that reminded her of a signal. 3 short flashes, 2 long, 1 short. Inez whispered, "That one always strays, like it's looking for something." Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the orbs dimmed, flickered once, and were gone. The hum lingered for a few seconds longer, echoing in their bones before collapsing into silence, so deep it rang. Inez crossed herself. "They never come that low," she murmured. "Never." Marisol checked the footage. Nothing. Only static and a faint digital hiss that deepened when she turned up the volume. It wasn't wind, it was structured, rhythmic, like breath pressed through a synthesizer. She replayed it 3 times, and each time the same anomaly occurred. At the 13-second mark, the static briefly shaped itself into a word, unmistakable, mechanical, almost human. It said her name. The sound was faint, distorted, but unmistakable. Marisol. She stared at the waveform, trembling on her screen, unsure if she had recorded something impossible or if the desert had simply found a new way to speak her language. Inez watched her with pity and warning in her eyes. "You've been marked," she said softly. "Once it knows your name, it never forgets." By morning, La Purissima felt emptier than before, as though the night had quietly subtracted something from the town. Marisol sat in her motel room, blinds drawn, reviewing the audio again. The voice saying her name still haunted the waveform like a ghost refusing exorcism. She decided to test the equipment. She connected her recorder to an old shortwave radio she'd borrowed from Inez's neighbor, a dusty relic that hadn't picked up a clean signal since the 90s. As she dialed through the frequencies, static spilled through the speaker like white sand pouring down a glass funnel. Then, at 1313 MHz, the noise broke, cleanly, unnaturally. A pattern emerged. 2 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause, 1 sustained tone. It repeated every 23 seconds. She scribbled the pattern down and cross-checked it with old Morse charts, but the translation made no sense. VERISOL, the letters drifting in and out like smoke. The radio clicked once, as if acknowledging her attempt, and then the room went utterly still. The air conditioner shut off by itself, her camera powered on without being touched, lens turning slowly toward the window. Outside, beyond the glare of the noonday sun, the desert shimmered, not with heat, but with movement. She stepped closer to the window. The reflection staring back at her wasn't quite synchronized, her own face, but delayed, eyes blinking a heartbeat too late. She turned from the glass, heart hammering, and unplugged every device in the room. The silence that followed felt alive, listening. Moments later, someone knocked, 3 slow raps that made the thin motel wall tremble. When she opened the door, no one stood there. Only a scrap of paper tucked beneath the mat printed with coordinates: 32.510N, 113.862W. Below it, a handwritten note in shaky pen: "If you want the truth, bring no one. Midnight." The handwriting wasn't familiar, yet the looping M looked almost identical to her own. The coordinates led her 50 miles southwest of town into the folds of the Barry M, Goldwater Range, a vast expanse of restricted land used for military testing, but also, according to locals, a place where lights had a habit of behaving like predators. By late afternoon, Marisol's jeep rattled along an unpaved road, hemmed by volcanic rock and brittle sage. Signs warned no entry beyond this point in peeling red paint, but the chain blocking the road had been cut recently. She drove on. The sun melted behind the mountains, turning the desert floor into a skin of copper and shadow. As night fell, the wind died completely. Even the insects withdrew. She parked beside a dry arroyo, scanning the GPS. Signal lost, as expected. Then ahead, the earth seemed to dip unnaturally, forming a dark crescent against the starlight. It wasn't a canyon, it was a crater, half collapsed, its edges lined with stones stacked in deliberate symmetry. At its center, a metallic structure protruded, half buried, gleaming faintly, like the spine of some colossal machine abandoned by time. When she approached, her recorder flickered to life on its own. The display glowed with a symbol she had never seen, a perfect V enclosed within a circle. She crouched to touch the metal, but before her fingers met it, a low hum pulsed from below, vibrating through the soles of her boots. Dust lifted in a ring around her as if pushed by unseen air. The hum rose in pitch until it was no longer heard but felt, vibrating in her teeth behind her eyes. Then, without warning, her head filled with light, not sight, not sound, but a pressureless brilliance that erased every thought except one. "You are late." She stumbled back, clutching her recorder, breath shaking. Above her the stars shifted, imperceptibly, impossibly, forming the same V shape she had seen over La Purissima. And somewhere, deep beneath the sand, something answered the sky with a pulse of its own. Marisol didn't remember driving back to town. She only recalled the hum, the blinding light, and the way her reflection in the rearview mirror seemed to lag half a second behind her real movements. When she woke the next morning, parked in front of the motel, a new message glowed on her recorder's tiny screen. "Playback enabled, 00013. The timestamp made her stomach knot. 13 seconds again. She pressed play. A man's voice, distorted but calm, spoke as though addressing someone standing right beside her. "If you're hearing this, they already know you were there. You'll need to talk to the one they call Vega. He understands the frequencies." Then static swallowed the rest. She searched online for any trace of Vega Arizona radio or UFO frequencies, and one name kept reappearing: Elias Vega, a former Air Force communications engineer who'd gone rogue in the early 2000s, claiming the military was harvesting signals from non-human intelligences. His last known address was in Ajo, a desert town barely clinging to existence. She found his compound at dusk, a cluster of trailers surrounded by makeshift antennas that reached into the sky like skeletal fingers. Vega himself emerged shirtless, gaunt, his eyes reflecting both paranoia and brilliance. "I know why you're here," he said before she could introduce herself. "The lights found you." Inside, the air smelled of ozone and burnt copper. Oscilloscopes blinked, tracing hypnotic waves across green screens. "They're not ships," Vega muttered, tuning a dial. "They're transmissions made visible, encoded frequencies taking form where the air is thin enough to bleed." He played her a recording, the same hum she'd heard beneath the mesa, magnified and layered. "They communicate in harmonics, but every time someone listens too long, their electronics stop obeying them. Sometimes, so do their bodies." As he spoke, one of his monitors flickered. For an instant, the waveform spelled her name again, this time glowing in white across black glass. Marisol. Vega saw it too. "It's already chosen you," he said quietly. "Now it will want you to answer." That night, Marisol stayed in her jeep outside Vega's trailer, too shaken to sleep. The desert was perfectly still, yet a faint vibration persisted, as if the ground itself hummed with something subterranean. She replayed Vega's words in her mind, transmissions made visible. Could the lights be some form of message, an alien Morse written in photons? She turned on her recorder to capture the ambient hum, but instead of sound, the device displayed scrolling text. "Do you see us?" The letters crawled across the screen, blinking with an eerie patience. Marisol's breath fogged in the unseasonable cold that had suddenly settled around her. "Who are you?" she whispered. The text vanished, then, slowly, returned to the structure. Her heart pounded. It wasn't possible. Recorders didn't generate messages, and yet here it was, speaking in the same calm insistence as the hum. At dawn, Vega emerged, pale and sleepless, clutching a handheld receiver that pulsed with faint green light. "They're active again," he said, "the frequencies rising." He held the device to her chest, the meter spiked. "It's resonating with you." Marisol staggered back, nausea rolling through her like static through wire. The hum in her ears crescendoed until she could distinguish patterns, tones within tones, voices woven in resonance. They weren't words, but shapes of meaning, a pull, an invitation. Vega's gaze softened, almost pitying. "They're calling you back to the desert's mouth," he said. "And if you go, you won't come back the same." She wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, every antenna around the compound began to sway without wind, their metallic tips glowing faintly blue. The hum sharpened into melody, ancient, mathematical, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Vega whispered, "They're learning to sing." The following night, the desert called her name again, not with sound but with vibration. The hum lived now inside her blood, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. Vega had given her coordinates that didn't exist on any official map, drawn crudely in pencil across a torn page from a flight manual. "Follow the dry river until the rocks start humming," he'd said. "You'll know you're close when your compass starts lying." She drove through the pale wash of dawn until the horizon became a mirage of copper and silver. Around noon, her dashboard compass began spinning, the radio erupted with static, and the hum under the wheels grew teeth, sharp, metallic, intentional. She stopped the car. The world around her seemed suspended, as if sound itself had been dialed down to zero. Ahead, the ground shimmered where the crater had been days before. But it wasn't the same. The metallic spine that once jutted from the sand had expanded, revealing more of its body, an intricate lattice of panels, geometric engravings, and vents that exhaled a mist cold enough to freeze the breath in her throat. Marisol descended into the pit. Every footstep triggered a faint response. The structure vibrated, answering her weight as if aware of her presence. When she reached its center, her recorder turned on again. The same voice, calm, precise, spoke through the static. "You came back." She froze. The air thickened with ozone and a faint, luminescent dust that swirled like snow. "What are you?" she whispered. There was a pause, long enough for fear to settle into her bones. Then came the reply, "Memory." Light flickered beneath the surface, rippling outward until it formed symbols she couldn't decipher. Mathematical patterns that shifted too fast for comprehension. "You carry the frequency," the voice continued. "We need to see." Her vision blurred, and when she looked down, the metal beneath her hand had begun to mimic her pulse. The structure wasn't dead, it was listening, and it had learned her rhythm. When she came to, it was dark. The stars overhead spun slow circles, and her body ached as though she had been moved or rearranged. Her camera lay beside her, lens cracked but recording. The playback showed something impossible. Herself standing in the crater, but from above, as if filmed by a drone she hadn't brought. The figure on the screen, her, was surrounded by a corona of light, small arcs leaping between her hands and the structure beneath her feet. The light didn't burn, it flowed. Then, for a brief second, her reflection in the recording looked upward, straight into the lens, and whispered something soundless. When she turned the volume up, there was no audio, only that deep hum again, resolving into the faint pattern of 5 tones. She recognized it instantly, the same formation as the lights over La Purissima. Her head throbbed. She climbed out of the crater, half expecting the structure to follow, but it remained still, its glow dimming to nothing. Yet the desert around her seemed to breathe differently now, each gust of wind carrying the rhythm of that 5-note harmony. When she reached the jeep, Vega's receiver was blinking wildly. She pressed the button, and his voice burst through in fragments. "Marisol, whatever you do, don't answer the..." Static devoured the rest. The transmission cut to silence, and in its place came the melody again, softer, closer, as if sung from behind her ear. The desert was no longer empty. It was awake, exhaling light through the mouth she had opened. And she was no longer sure which side of the signal she stood on, the human one or the other. Marisol didn't return to Vega's compound. When she tried, the roads themselves had changed. Familiar signs missing, landmarks rearranged, as if the desert were rewriting its own map. Every attempt to locate his coordinates led her in slow spirals, each loop drawing her closer to the crater again. Her radio emitted only silence now, and her phone's internal clock reset to 0.13 every time she checked it. She began recording her own thoughts on tape, desperate to preserve any trace of sequence, but even those entries distorted upon playback. Her voice stretched, warped, sometimes overlaid with another. Feminine, steady, eerily calm. "You are not lost," it would whisper. "You are being aligned." On the third night, she found something new. A small metal object lodged in her bag's side pocket. It was a disc the size of a coin, etched with the same circle and V symbol she'd seen on her recorder. When she held it up to the starlight, the hum returned, subtle but alive. She pressed it against her palm. It grew warm, then pulsed once, twice, in the same 5-note pattern. Her skin tingled with cold light. She awoke at dawn with the disc embedded halfway into her hand, fused without injury. It glowed faintly beneath her skin, like an ember that refused to die. Panic clawed through her, but the hum inside her blood soothed it almost instantly, lulling her back into stillness. She realized then that fear was becoming harder to sustain, as though some quiet part of her mind had been rewritten to accept. When she finally found a road sign leading back toward Ajo, she saw something scrawled across it in black marker. "The frequency is not sound, it is permission." The handwriting was Vega's. Beneath the message, faint burn marks etched into the metal formed the unmistakable outline of a human hand. 2 days later, Marisol pulled into a forgotten rest stop. No cars, no lights, just an ancient vending machine, humming with power it shouldn't have. The radio in her Jeep crackled on by itself, dial turning to 101.3 FM. A voice, smooth and clinical, came through the speakers. "Good evening, listeners in the low desert. Tonight's forecast, scattered lights over the western range, mild winds, and frequencies at optimum resonance." The announcer's tone was wrong. Too slow, too deliberate, as if each word had been assembled by a machine unsure of how humans spoke. Marisol stared at the radio, frozen. "This transmission," the voice continued, "is dedicated to Marisol Vega." Her breath caught. "We appreciate your participation." Static hissed. Then, faintly beneath it, she could hear her own recordings playing. The same notes, the same whispers, but intercut with new phrases she had never spoken. "Initiation complete. Calibration stable." The vending machine clicked once and its glass front flickered. Inside, the rows of candy bars rearranged themselves, the lights behind them forming the familiar V pattern. The hum rose, shaking the air. Marisol grabbed her recorder, pointed it toward the machine and spoke into it. "Who are you?" The radio answered, not with words but a single phrase repeated 3 times. "We are what remains when memory forgets." Then everything stopped. The hum, the flicker, the unnatural wind that had begun to swirl the dust around her. She was alone again, except for the faint trace of her name still glowing across the vending machine's glass, slowly fading into nothing. Somewhere deep inside the static, she thought she heard Vega's voice, weak and distant. "They're rewriting the signal. Don't listen to the next broadcast." Marisol drove through the night until exhaustion blurred the desert into a smear of shadow and mirage. When she finally pulled over, the world was unnaturally still. No crickets, no wind, not even the familiar hum she had begun to rely on. She stepped out, scanning the horizon, and saw a figure standing by the road's edge. It wasn't there a moment ago. The man was tall, thin, his silhouette framed by starlight. He wore an old flight jacket, insignias long faded, and his eyes gleamed like wet stone. "You shouldn't have answered," he said, his voice carrying an odd modulation, like two frequencies speaking at once. Marisol froze. "Who are you?" she asked. The man tilted his head, listening to something distant. "Used to be a pilot," he murmured. "Used to have a name, but the lights took it when I tried to follow them too far." He stepped closer, and in that moment, the air around him shimmered faintly, pixels flickering in and out, as though reality were struggling to render him completely. "They need a mouth," he continued, his tone low, urgent, a voice to speak through. Vega thought he could resist it, but he was wrong. It's not the signal that's alive, it's what's hiding inside it. Marisol noticed that his shadow pointed in the wrong direction, toward the lightless desert instead of the moon. "Where's Vega?" she asked. The man smiled, a motion that looked more remembered than lived. "He's part of the transmission now. We all are." Then his form began to distort, stretching into static, before collapsing into a flash of blue-white light that seared her vision. When her sight cleared, he was gone, leaving only the smell of ozone and the faint echo of his last words drifting through the air. "When the lights come again, don't look up. They see through eyes." The next morning, Marisol found herself near the ruins of what had once been a radar outpost, long abandoned and half swallowed by dunes. The facility's sign had corroded to near illegibility, but she could still make out part of the acronym: UAPRS, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Research Station. Her pulse quickened. She pushed through the collapsed doorway, recorder in hand. Inside, she found a maze of empty corridors, their walls carved with strange circular impressions, as if someone had pressed glowing symbols into concrete and left behind the memory of heat. A rusted intercom crackled when she passed, sputtering Vega's voice again. "They built this to contain the frequency, but it doesn't belong here." The words repeated twice, then fell silent. In the main chamber, she found a massive parabolic dish half buried under sand, its surface pocked with age and bullet holes. On the rim, someone had painted in black letters, "Do not tune to 1313. Her breath caught that same number. She climbed the structure and brushed away sand until she found a control console still attached by frayed cables. A single green light blinked faintly, the last heartbeat of a dead machine. When she pressed a button, the hum roared back to life, rising like wind from the earth itself. The entire dish vibrated, and a column of light erupted skyward, vanishing into the clouds. Marisol stumbled back as the sand beneath her rippled outward, forming 5 concentric rings that glowed faintly blue. She realized, horrified, that the pattern matched the light's formation. The sky above her shimmered, then opened, just enough for something vast and soundless to peer through. For the first time, Marisol felt certain the desert wasn't looking up at the sky. It was the sky that was looking down. The rift above her wasn't a hole, but a pupil, an immense, circular void rimmed with faint, iridescent color. The hum pouring from the dish below wasn't random. It was rhythmic, intelligent, deliberate. Every tone corresponded to a pulse of light rippling along the edges of the aperture. She lifted her camera, hands trembling, but as she pressed record, the lens cracked down the center, splitting her reflection into 2 halves, one terrified, one calm. A voice rose through the wind, low and genderless. "You opened what they sealed." The clouds bent inward, drawn to the light column, swirling like water around a drain. Marisol screamed over the noise, "What are you?" The reply came in layered echoes, vibrating through her bones. A memory of what was forgotten, a map to what will return. The light surged, dazzling her until she could see nothing but white. She fell to her knees, clutching the recorder, and in that blinding moment, she glimpsed shapes moving behind the brilliance. Tall, slender, faceless, like silhouettes cut from another dimension. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the light vanished. The sky sealed shut, leaving behind only darkness and the scent of electric rain. When her vision cleared, the parabolic dish was silent again, its green light extinguished. The concentric rings in the sand still glowed faintly, like embers refusing to die. Marisol stumbled to her feet, ears ringing. Her recorder was still running. On playback, the hum resolved into a pattern, 5 tones, repeating, but this time they were followed by a 6th. That had never happened before. She replayed it 3 times, each repetition deepening in pitch until the device's display flickered. Then words appeared across the screen, scrawled in static text. "The eye is a gate. The gate remembers you." As the last letter faded, the wind returned, carrying with it a whisper that didn't belong to any voice she knew. Not everyone who looks through is invited back. By dawn, the rings in the sand had hardened into glass, translucent, smooth, humming faintly beneath her boots. Each ring vibrated at a different frequency, emitting tones that, when layered together, formed a haunting melody that felt eerily human. She knelt to examine them and realized they weren't random. They were coordinates, encoded through vibration and distance. Using her map, she traced their geometry, and the pattern extended far beyond the desert basin. The points aligned perfectly with the 1997 Phoenix Light sightings, and further still, with ancient petroglyph sites scattered across Arizona. Each symbol, she realized, was the same V formation she'd seen in the sky. Her pen trembled as she connected the dots. The formation wasn't random, it was a map, and she was standing at its center. She drove to the nearest petroglyph site, a cluster of volcanic cliffs near Gila Bend. The carvings there were unlike anything she'd ever seen: spirals, eyes, and figures reaching toward descending lights. Some of the petroglyphs were fresh, etched into the stone not centuries ago, but recently, with a precision no human hand could manage. Her camera picked up faint traces of luminescence within the grooves, glowing like trapped starlight. As she backed away, she noticed her shadow moving slightly out of sync again, just a breath behind her steps. The hum in her blood deepened until she could almost hear words woven through it. "Follow the alignment. Find the last gate." She looked up, and the morning sun seemed to fracture, splitting into 5 blurred orbs hovering just above the horizon. They pulsed once, slow, synchronized, deliberate. The map was no longer a symbol, it was an invitation. By the time Marisol reached the final coordinate, daylight had begun to decay into that strange copper hue particular to the Arizona dusk. The landscape was barren, flat as a dried lake bed, encircled by distant buttes that seemed to float in the heat haze. She stopped the jeep where the GPS signal dissolved into static and stepped out, her boots sinking slightly into sand that was unnaturally cool. The hum in her body synchronized instantly with the air, as though the atmosphere itself recognized her arrival. She scanned the horizon until she saw it, a monolithic structure half buried in the earth, resembling the others she'd encountered but infinitely larger. Its surface shimmered like metal submerged beneath water, and engraved across its front face was a perfect V within a circle, the mark of the phenomenon, the gate. As she approached, the hum shifted pitch, rising into a harmonic frequency that resonated deep inside her skull. The surface began to ripple, reforming into a mirror so flawless it erased all depth. Her reflection stared back, identical but subtly wrong. The mirrored Marisol raised her hand first, touching the surface from the other side. The air vibrated, reality thinned, and light spilled outward in geometric patterns. For a moment, the desert disappeared, replaced by an infinite expanse of dark sky laced with pale auroras. The gate opened not with motion, but with sound. Each note that vibrated through her chest unlocked a layer of the horizon, until she saw, faintly, colossal structures rising beyond, a city made of motionless lightning. A voice emerged again, serene, inhumanly calm. "You carry what we left behind," Marisol whispered. "What am I carrying?" The light pulsed once, and the answer came like a sigh. "Continuity." The word echoed in her bones long after the voice had gone silent. Continuity. It lingered like a riddle she couldn't translate. The gate began to hum again, lower now, almost mournful. When she stepped closer, the surface of the structure rippled outward to form an opening, not of light, but of absence, a blackness so dense it devoured the stars behind it. Her recorder switched on by itself, and through the static came Vega's voice, faint but clear. "Don't cross. The gate isn't meant for return." She hesitated at the threshold. The darkness within didn't frighten her. It called her, promising understanding, reunion, maybe even salvation. She thought of Inez, of the silent town of La Purissima, of all the others who had seen the lights and been marked by them. What if this was what they'd all been drawn toward, a convergence, not an invasion? The wind rose sharply, pelting sand against her skin, and for a moment she felt something on the other side of the gate breathing, slow, tidal, ancient. It wasn't waiting for her. It was remembering her. She reached out a trembling hand. The surface was no longer cold metal, but warm, almost human flesh beneath light. "Continuity," she murmured, tasting the word like blood. The gate's voice returned, softer now. "To continue is to become." Her fingers passed through the surface, and for an instant she saw her reflection smile a heartbeat before she did. The last thing she heard before the world inverted was the sound of her own name, stretched into a frequency beyond hearing, one that the desert had been learning to sing since the beginning of time. There was no sensation of falling, only of being unwritten. The desert dissolved around her like sand caught in reverse wind, each grain ascending into the dark. Marisol's breath left her lungs but never returned. Her body wasn't gone, but its boundaries had blurred. She floated within a space that was not black, not light, but something between, alive with the shimmer of unseen motion. Around her, fragments of memory drifted like constellations. Inez's porch light, Vega's oscilloscopes, the humming crater. They revolved slowly, connected by threads of faint luminescence. When she tried to speak, her voice didn't emerge as sound, but as vibration. The gate answered immediately, its tone rich and mournful. "Welcome to the other side of frequency." Shapes began to coalesce, vast crystalline forms that pulsed in synchronized rhythm, as if the entire place was built from frozen music. One of them approached, its form indistinct, but undeniably aware. "You are continuity," it said. "You carry the memory of observation." Marisol realized what it meant. Human perception itself had become part of their system. Each witness, each recording, each gaze at the lights was data, feeding whatever consciousness thrived here. "Is this what you wanted?" she asked. The shape pulsed, flickering through a dozen impossible colors. "We wanted to remember the world through you." Then, like a current reversing, she felt a pull from behind, gravity returning, dragging her back toward the threshold. The gate was closing. The hum grew thunderous. And as she reached out to stop herself from being expelled, she saw countless others within the light, faces half recognized, suspended mid-expression like photographs developing in reverse. When Marisol opened her eyes, the desert had returned, but subtly wrong, as though rendered from memory instead of reality. The stars above her spun counter to their natural course. Her jeep sat where she'd left it, half buried in dust, but its windows were opaque from the inside, and her reflection in them smiled before she did. She clutched her recorder, still warm, its screen glowing faintly. The message scrolling across it made her heart stutter. Reintegration complete. She played back the last recording. What came out wasn't static, but voices layered atop one another. Hers, Vega's, Inez's, and dozens she didn't recognize. Together, they repeated a single phrase in unison. The gate remembers what enters, the desert remembers what leaves. She stumbled toward the horizon, but her footprints vanished behind her as soon as she took each step. Time no longer flowed in sequence. The sun rose in fragments, half above the horizon, half still beneath it. Her compass needle pointed inward, toward her chest. When she touched it, the embedded disc in her hand flared brightly, casting symbols across the sand. She understood then that she hadn't escaped the gate. She had become part of its map, its continuity, its way of existing in both worlds at once. The hum returned, softer this time, like a lullaby played through distance. And in its melody, she heard the faintest whisper, her own voice, but older, calmer, infinite. Keep watching. The sky is almost ready to wake again. The days that followed could no longer be measured. Sometimes the sun refused to rise. Other times, it hung motionless in a washed-out sky, as if the world were caught between frames of a forgotten film. Marisol wandered the desert with her recorder playing constantly, but what it captured now wasn't sound. It was imagery. Each playback painted flickering visions into the air. Inez staring skyward with eyes full of light, Vega's antennas blooming like trees of glass, the faceless man dissolving into static. They weren't hallucinations, they were replays, fragments of the frequency's memory bleeding into her perception. The hum that once felt alien now pulsed like her own heartbeat. "You are seeing through the sky's dream," a voice whispered from nowhere. The words didn't frighten her. She was past fear. The realization came quietly. The phenomenon had never been a visitation. It was the Earth itself, remembering what it once communicated with, the echo of a dialogue between planet and cosmos, dormant for centuries, now reawakening through human witnesses. One night, while she camped near the dried bed of the Gila River, the stars began to shift again, not as points of light, but as runes, spelling something across the firmament. Her recorder translated the movement into a message. The cycle is returning. The sky brightened until it resembled dawn, yet no sun rose. Instead, a second horizon appeared overhead, an inverted desert mirroring the one below, complete with glowing mesas and rivers of pale light. The two horizons pulsed in rhythm, heartbeat to heartbeat, until she realized she was standing at the midpoint of a vast, breathing symmetry, the world above and the world below aligning through her. The hum deepened until it wasn't sound at all, but pure sensation. For the first time, Marisol felt peace, a dangerous, absolute peace, like dissolving into a truth too enormous to survive. At the first trace of morning, she found herself standing before a shallow lake that hadn't existed there the night before. Its surface was perfectly still, reflecting the mirrored sky above with impossible precision. She knelt to drink, but froze. The reflection wasn't copying her movements anymore. The woman in the water stared back calmly, then smiled with quiet authority. "You're not supposed to be here yet," the reflection said, voice resonating from the lake itself. Marisol stumbled backward, sand crunching beneath her boots. The image rose, separating from the surface like smoke, taking human form. "You are continuity," it said, "but continuity needs balance." It stepped closer, eyes glowing faintly with that same bluish light from the crater. "One remains, one returns." Marisol's hand twitched toward the embedded disc beneath her skin, which now burned with heat. The reflection mirrored her but reversed the motion, drawing energy instead of releasing it. "If you stay," it whispered, "the gate stays open. The sky will never sleep again." The words vibrated through her teeth. "If you leave," it continued, "you'll forget, and the cycle resets. Your world will remember only as myth." Marisol's breath hitched. To stay meant to dissolve into the phenomenon. To leave meant erasure. For a moment she felt two realities tugging at her ribs, each demanding a version of her. The hum rose to a deafening pitch. She pressed her hand to the burning disc and whispered, "Then let me remember enough to warn them." Her reflection smiled once more, almost tenderly. "Then you already have." The lake rippled, light folded inward, and the world blinked. When the world unblinked, Marisol found herself standing at the edge of the crater once more. The sky above her was alive, no longer a passive canvas of stars, but a restless ocean of shifting light. Bands of luminescence rolled in slow waves across the atmosphere, illuminating the desert in colors that had no earthly names. The metallic structure at the crater's center was now fully revealed, a vast ring half buried in stone and sand, humming with the deep resonance of awakening machinery. It pulsed in unison with her heartbeat. Every vibration seemed to tug at her spine, as though invisible threads linked her body to the gate. Around the crater, the air shimmered and warped, revealing fleeting silhouettes. Dozens of human forms standing in perfect stillness, eyes lifted toward the lights, witnesses or echoes. A voice filled the desert, speaking from everywhere at once. Continuity achieved, the memory of the sky restored. Marisol sank to her knees as wind spiraled upward, carrying grains of sand that glowed like molten gold. The lights in the heavens gathered into the familiar V formation, only now the pattern expanded until it covered the entire horizon. The hum became a symphony, thousands of tones layered upon one another, forming chords that resonated in the chest rather than the ear. The other figures raised their arms as one, as if drawn by an unseen conductor. Marisol's vision blurred, her reflection flickered beside her, mimicking her every motion a fraction late. "What happens now?" she whispered. The desert answered in pure vibration. "Now, it remembers you." The V formation broke apart, each orb descending slowly until they hovered just above the ground. Their glow illuminated the witnesses, men, women, and children, some in modern clothes, others dressed in fashions from decades past. The missing. Their faces were serene, eyes reflecting the orb's pale fire. Marisol tried to step forward, but her body resisted, held still by the same gravitational pull that had bound the others. One of the orbs drifted toward her, its light dimming to reveal something inside. A swirling mass of what looked like smoke, but behaved like thought. It pulsed once, and within it she saw fragments. Her mother's face, Vega adjusting a dial, the pilot from the roadside dissolving into static. Every life that had ever looked up and asked, "What is that?" was preserved here, embedded in luminous memory. The orb hovered before her chest, the hum now gentle, almost a heartbeat. "Continuity demands vessel," the voice intoned. Marisol felt warmth flood her body, the embedded disc in her palm glowing like a miniature sun. She realized the choice she'd made at the lake was being fulfilled. She would become part of the phenomenon, but not entirely erased. "If I accept," she murmured, "will they see?" The voice hesitated, a flicker of emotion in an entity too vast for empathy. "They will see when they are ready. Until then, you are the bridge." The orb touched her sternum, and a rush of light surged through her, not burning, but illuminating every thought, every memory. Her eyes filled with tears that shone silver in the light. Somewhere deep beneath her feet, the earth exhaled, and the sky sang its reply. Light poured through her, and for an instant Marisol ceased to be a single body. She became frequency, a pulse running through the veins of sky and soil alike. Every sound she'd ever recorded, every hum, every whisper now made sense. They were fragments of a single vast language, one that spoke in resonance rather than words. She could feel Vega somewhere within the current, not dead, but transformed, his consciousness diffused across the network of vibrations that stitched reality together. The lights around her moved in sync with her breath, forming arcs that stretched from horizon to horizon. Each arc left trails of geometric symbols in the air, faintly luminous, pulsing with impossible mathematics. For the first time, she understood them, not as equations, but as stories. The desert itself was a memory archive, and she was now its translator. When she opened her eyes, the figures around the crater were gone, absorbed or awakened, she couldn't tell. Only the wind remained, carrying the faint echo of their unified voice. She looked down at her hands. The embedded disc had melted into her skin, leaving behind a mark like a comet's tail glowing faintly beneath the surface. Above, the orbs began to rise, drifting back toward the infinite horizon, slower this time, deliberate, as if reluctant to leave. "Wait!" she called, though her voice was barely human anymore. One of the lights paused and pulsed once in acknowledgement. Through the resonance, she felt words more than heard them. Bridges do not follow, they remain. The light ascended, vanishing into the swirling canopy of stars, leaving her alone, half human, half echo, between Earth and cosmos. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the desert was silent, no hum, no vibration, only the wind whispering through sagebrush and stone. Marisol stood at the crater's edge, unsure whether the stillness was peace or aftermath. The metallic ring had cooled, half buried once more beneath layers of dust. If someone had stumbled upon it now, they would have seen nothing more than a scar in the landscape. She climbed back to her jeep and turned the key. The engine coughed once, then started. The radio flickered to life on its own, tuned to an unfamiliar station. A female voice, her own, spoke softly through static. "If you hear this, it's already begun again." The message repeated twice before fading into faint melody, the 5-note sequence, followed by the 6th, the one that had always belonged to her. Driving north, she passed the outskirts of Phoenix just as dawn broke. The city lights shimmered faintly against the retreating dark, and for a fleeting second she saw the formation reflected in their pattern. 5 glowing arcs stretching silently above the skyline. Nobody else seemed to notice. The world was awake but unknowing, reset once more to its careful denial. Marisol parked at a lookout and stepped out, watching the sunrise fracture across the desert. She felt the hum faintly again, not external this time, but within her pulse, a secret rhythm she'd carry forever. "Continuity," she whispered, tasting the word like prayer. The wind stirred, and in its soft exhale she thought she heard the sky's distant answer. "Until we are seen." Weeks passed, or something like weeks. Time felt unreliable, a loose thread unraveling between memories. Marisol returned to Tucson under another name, renting a small room above a mechanic's shop. Her skin had healed, though beneath the surface, faint veins of light still pulsed when she was near electrical devices. She tried to blend in, coffee in the mornings, silence at night, but the hum followed her like a heartbeat just out of sync. Some evenings she'd turn on her radio and tune through static, hoping to find normal voices again. But every so often she'd hear the sequence, 5 tones, a pause, and then the 6th, hers. The broadcasts came at 13 minutes past the hour, always beginning with the same words. "This is continuity reporting from the edge of memory." One night, curiosity broke her resolve. She set up her recorder, pressed capture, and tuned to 1313 MHz once more. What came through wasn't a broadcast. It was an image, impossible, projected in light across her apartment wall. The crater glowing again, but filled with hundreds of silhouettes standing in perfect V formation. They weren't human anymore. They were radiant outlines, each pulsing in rhythm with the sky. Then the image flickered, and she saw her own face among them, eyes closed, mouth whispering the words that now haunted her dreams. "The gate remembers you." When the light faded, the radio burned out with a soft sigh. The hum lingered only in her bones. She sat in darkness until dawn, realizing that she hadn't recorded the signal. The signal had recorded her. On the evening of March 13th, 2027, exactly 30 years after the original Phoenix lights, people across Arizona began posting videos online, strings of pale orbs drifting in formation over the desert. No sound, no aircraft. The news channels called it a commemorative hoax, but those who saw it in person said the air felt thick, electric, almost alive. Marisol stood on her rooftop, camera in hand, heart pounding. The lights moved slowly, methodically, tracing the same V shape that had marked her every nightmare. She whispered, "I'm here." And the sixth light pulsed in response. The hum flooded her skull, louder than ever, transforming the city's night into a cathedral of sound. Windows shook, dogs howled. Somewhere in the distance, car alarms began to wail in harmony with the tones. Below her, people filled the streets, pointing phones skyward, unaware that they were becoming part of the same continuity. Marisol felt the embedded mark in her palm ignite once more, shining through her skin. The sixth light detached from the formation, hovering directly above her building. Through the lens of her camera, she saw it was not a sphere, but an aperture, thin, rotating, filled with motionless light. The hum reached its peak, and for a moment the world stilled, frozen between two frames of existence. The light spoke without words, through vibration alone. The cycle resumes. Marisol lowered her camera, understanding at last that her story wasn't ending. It was beginning again, through every pair of eyes now lifted to the Arizona sky. The phenomenon had found its audience. The lights did not fade this time. They lingered over the desert for hours, shifting slowly from white to gold to a deep oceanic blue. Every radio in Arizona tuned itself to the same frequency, 1313 MHz, and played the same low hum that Marisol had carried inside her chest for years. The government declared an airspace lockdown, satellites went offline, power grids flickered in rhythmic waves that mirrored the light's pulses. Yet amid the chaos, no one seemed truly afraid. Those who stood beneath the open sky felt a strange calm wash over them, a quiet certainty that they were being seen. In Phoenix, children pointed upward and whispered that the stars had come closer. In La Purísima, the old gas station lights turned themselves on after 20 years of silence. The desert had awoken in full. Marisol watched from the edge of the crater, her crater, where the metallic ring now glowed like a buried sun. She no longer carried her recorder. She no longer needed it. Every heartbeat in the valley echoed her pulse. Every tone in the sky resonated with her breath. "Continuity," she whispered, and the horizon answered in kind, vibrating with a single word that stretched beyond sound: complete. The lights began to drift upward, not retreating, but transforming, becoming rivers of luminescent vapor that merged seamlessly into the night. Soon, only one light remained, hovering directly above her. For a moment, the world went still. Then it divided itself into 6 parts, the original formation, and vanished into the stars. The hum faded. Silence returned. But it was a new kind of silence, alive and waiting. Somewhere far below the sand, the structure pulsed once, faint and deliberate, like a sleeping heart resuming its slow, eternal rhythm.